The colony world had already lost its name in the smoke. On the tactical displays of the UNSC, it still existed as a string of numbers and grid lines, a place to defend, a place to abandon, a place to bury beneath official language if the line broke. But on the ground, under the rain of burning debris and blue-white plasma, it was only ruin. Steel skeletons of buildings leaned into the wind. Roads had melted into black glass. Warthogs screamed through drifting ash while Marines fired upward at shapes moving through the haze, desperate to hold a district that no longer looked human. The Covenant came in waves that never felt hurried. That was the worst part. Humanity fought like prey with speed and panic and courage sharpened by fear. The Covenant advanced like judgment. Phantoms drifted above the shattered streets and dropped infantry into the flames with ceremonial precision. Needlers glittered in the dark like fragments of a poisoned star. Plasma bolts hissed through broken windows and turned cover into liquid fire. Everywhere men shouted coordinates, prayer, ammunition counts, names of people who were already gone. The battle felt less like a war and more like a slow correction, as if the universe had decided this colony had survived too long. Sergeant Elias Varon had seen enough invasions to know when a position was dead. His squad was dug into the shell of a municipal archive, firing through a collapsed facade, while the last of the civilian evac transports fought for altitude beyond the skyline. Every few seconds the comms crackled with fragments from other units, all of them saying the same thing in different tones. We are being overrun. We are cut off. We need air. We need armor. We need a miracle. Then the west side of the avenue ruptured with a burst of white light that was not plasma, not artillery, not anything in the UNSC handbook. For one strange second, the battlefield paused around it. A circle of distortion tore open above the street, folding the air inward like wet paper. Dust rose into it. Broken signs bent toward it. Even the Covenant hesitated, their firing stuttering as shadows twisted around the light. Then something dropped out of the rift and hit the pavement hard enough to crack it. The anomaly snapped shut at once, leaving only thunder, drifting sparks, and a man on his knees in the middle of a war that should have vaporized him instantly. He looked wrong in a way Sergeant Varon could not explain. Not augmented, just wrong. His clothes were torn, dark with blood, and too crude for UNSC issue. His face was hidden beneath a curtain of sweat-soaked hair, his body hunched like an animal waking in the open. He had the build of a brawler, not a soldier, and yet there was something in the way he held still that made nearby Marines stop shouting. He seemed less confused than furious, like a man dragged out of one nightmare and dropped into another without warning. A young private shouted that they had found a survivor. Another yelled to get him into cover before the Covenant saw movement. Varon almost repeated the order, but then the stranger lifted his head, and there was nothing civilian in his eyes. They were not the eyes of a man scanning for rescue. They were the eyes of a predator trying to understand which forest he had woken up in. The answer came fast. A lance of plasma tore across the avenue and exploded against the wreck of a transport near him. Shrapnel spun through the smoke. Jackals advanced behind glowing shields while a pair of elites moved with deliberate confidence through the burning street, certain that whatever stood alone before them would die like everything else on this world. The stranger staggered upright as flames licked across his shoulders. For a heartbeat he seemed ready to fall. Then his posture changed. Pain vanished beneath instinct. Confusion narrowed into violence. He moved before anyone could warn him. Faster than a wounded man should have been able to move, he crossed the debris in a blur of muscle and fury. The first jackal barely raised its shield before three metal claws burst from stranger's fists with a wet metallic snap that cut through gunfire like a secret being spoken aloud. He hit the shield head-on, drove through it, and tore the alien down in the same motion. Marines who had spent years fighting the Covenant had never seen close-quarters combat look so brutal, so intimate, so certain. The avenue became a different kind of battlefield. Plasma still fell. Rifles still barked. But now there was a single figure inside the storm, weaving through it instead of enduring it. He took a blast across the side that should have killed him. He kept moving. An elite swung an energy sword in a flash of blue light, and the stranger met it with those impossible claws, sparks ripping through the smoke as metal kissed plasma. Then he slipped inside the alien's reach and carved upward with savage efficiency. No one knew his name. No one knew what had fallen from the sky. But as Covenant troops pulled back for one stunned moment, and Marines stared at the blood steaming from wounds that were already closing, one truth settled over the shattered street. This war had just made room for something it did not understand. At first, the Marines thought adrenaline was disguising the damage. Battlefield vision lied all the time. Men walked on broken legs, kept firing with punctured lungs, laughed through shock because the body had not yet informed the mind that it was dying. That was common. That was human. What they were seeing now was neither. The stranger took a direct plasma strike across his back that sent him spinning against a wall, and the flesh there charred black before their eyes. He should have collapsed. He should have screamed until his throat failed. Instead, he rose through the smoke with the same hateful focus, as if pain were only weather passing over him. Corporal Jenks saw it clearest. She was reloading behind a split concrete barrier when the man dropped beside her, one arm hanging useless, half his face burned raw. She recoiled, not from disgust, but from the certainty that she was looking at a corpse still moving. Then the ruined flesh began to mend, not slowly, not in the vague way bruises fade over days. It crawled shut in seconds, red muscle knitting, blistered skin sealing over damage that should have required a medical wing and divine intervention. The stranger inhaled like a drowning man reaching air, gave her one hard glance, then launched himself back into the street before she could even speak. Word spread down the Marine line in fragments. He got hit and stood back up. He is some kind of black project. He has armor under the skin. He is not human. Nobody had time to settle on the right explanation because the Covenant pressed harder, and every fresh attack gave the impossible man another chance to violate reason. He crashed into grunts with the efficiency of a butcher, disarmed jackals by hacking through wrists and shield gauntlets, and when elites tried to keep him at range, he used wreckage, smoke, and pure animal timing to close the distance. He fought like a creature built for corridors, trenches, alleys, and other tight places where war stopped being noble and became personal. That was what made him terrifying even to allies. Spartans inspired confidence because they embodied order. Their strength had shape. Their violence had purpose. Every movement said humanity had found a way to discipline fear. This man was different. He did not look engineered for war. He looked like war had failed to kill him so many times that he had learned to treat it like an old insult. He ducked, lunged, tore, and endured with a savagery that no training manual could teach because it came from somewhere older than doctrine. High above the district, an orbiting surveillance feed caught him carving through a Covenant boarding party near the transit line. The footage reached a Spartan fire team deployed farther east. They watched in silence as the stranger absorbed the blast from a needler burst, ripped free super-combined shards with his bare hands, then used the moment of enemy hesitation to disembowel an elite before the alien could recover. One Spartan finally broke the silence over secure comms and asked the question the rest were already considering. Was this new? Another answered just as quietly. If it was UNSC, command would have told us. The team leader said nothing for several seconds. Then he replied with the only honest assessment. Track him. On the ground, Sergeant Varon tried twice to order the stranger into cover. Both times the man ignored him completely. There was no acknowledgement, no hostility, not even contempt. It was worse than that. It was indifference. Order simply did not exist in whatever inner world was driving him forward. He reacted to screams, to gunfire, to the sight of civilians trapped beneath wreckage. He moved toward danger not because anyone directed him there, but because every instinct inside him recognized where the killing was thickest. When a phantom lowered over the avenue and dropped a fresh squad of elites directly behind the Marine line, panic rippled through the defense. The Marines had no angle, no time to pivot, no room to survive a flanking strike. The stranger solved the problem in seconds. He leapt onto the descending troop platform before it fully cleared, vanished into a storm of blue flashes and muzzle fire, and then bodies began to fall from the open bay. Grunts tumbled first, then an elite, then another, clutching at its throat. The Phantom lurched sideways as if the pilot had lost control, and the stranger dropped from its edge just before it smashed into a tower and erupted in a bloom of flame. Now even the Marines who feared him started aiming where he went. A rhythm formed around him. Fire teams advanced when he broke a position open. Wounded soldiers survived because enemy attention kept snapping toward the one target that refused to stay dead. In a battlefield ruled by superior alien technology, he introduced something primitive and disruptive: uncertainty. The Covenant had prepared for armored vehicles, for orbital guns, for Spartans and Marines, and all the measurable tools of human resistance. They had not prepared for a single snarling man with metal in his bones and death in his hands. By the time dusk began bleeding through the smoke, Command had stopped asking whether he could survive. The real question had become something far more unsettling. If he could survive this, what exactly had humanity just found? They brought him in under guard after the line finally stabilized. Not captured because nobody there believed they truly could capture him if he decided otherwise. Not welcomed either, because the UNSC did not know how to welcome something it could not categorize. The facility was a hardened operations center beneath the ruins of a transport hub, all sealed doors, white light, and controlled air. Logan hated it the moment he stepped inside. Too clean, too still. Too many eyes measuring him through reinforced glass, as if the battlefield outside had delivered a specimen instead of a man. Medical scans failed to produce comfort. His skeleton made technicians swear under their breath. His tissue repair made doctors rerun results they knew were already correct. Old scars crossed his body like a history of impossible survival. Yet many of the worst injuries showed no record of damage at all, because they had already healed beyond evidence. He let them examine him only because he was exhausted, and because part of him needed answers no one here could give. Where was he? What year was it? What kind of world armed children in armor and sent them to die against monsters with glowing swords? The Spartans entered after the scientists. That felt deliberate. First the instruments, then the comparison. 3 of them stood across the observation room in armor that turned them into statues of military certainty. Their visors gave nothing away, but Logan could feel the assessment behind them. They looked at him the way wolves look at another predator on the edge of their territory. Not afraid. Not careless, curious. One stepped forward and removed her helmet. Her face was young, harder than it should have been, shaped by discipline that had begun too early. She introduced herself with rank first, name second. Logan answered with neither. They asked about his abilities. He gave them silence. They asked about the metal in his body. He lit a cigar that security somehow had not taken from him, then remembered with a grimace that he did not know whether smoking was even legal in this century. One Spartan almost smiled. Another did not move at all. The lead officer changed tactics and asked how he had fought so effectively against a species he had never seen before. That finally got his attention. "You people think fighting needs a manual," Logan said. "It just needs a reason." That answer lingered in the room, because the Spartans understood reason differently. Their bodies had been altered, their reflexes refined, their minds drilled into cooperation so complete it bordered on ritual. They were the final expression of military order, human will sharpened into a weapon system. Logan could see it in the way they stood, in how they turned toward one another without speaking, in how every question they asked was aimed at usefulness. They wanted to know what category he belonged to because categories could be deployed. But Logan did not belong to one. That was the problem. He was stronger than an ordinary man, fast enough to track danger before others sensed it, and built to survive damage that would reduce most soldiers to names on a wall. In those ways he resembled them. Yet the resemblance ended where obedience began. Spartans were forged to carry command inside themselves. Logan carried memory, rage, and something more ancient than patriotism. He fought for people in front of him, not flags behind him. He protected the weak when he chose to, not when doctrine demanded it. He did not salute. He did not report. He did not ask permission to become violent. UNS command saw risk in that independence. The Spartans saw something more complicated. In Logan they recognized a mirror that reflected only fragments of themselves. He had their instincts without their structure, their lethality without their program, their endurance without their chain of command. He was proof that power could exist outside the machine, and institutions rarely liked such proof. The tension sharpened when a senior officer entered and began speaking about strategic integration, enhanced asset, field utility, command compliant. Logan listened until the officer used the word containment, and then the room changed temperature. His claws did not come out, but everyone present knew they could. The Spartan shifted almost invisibly, not to threaten him, but to prepare for mathematics. How fast could he move? Which angles mattered? Who would reach him first if diplomacy failed? Logan stood, slow and deliberate. He told them he was not their project, not their soldier, and not interested in wearing anybody's leash, no matter how polished the collar looked. Then he asked what kind of war needed men like them in the first place. No one answered quickly because everyone in the room knew the truth. A losing one. That silence did more than the argument. For the first time since arriving, Logan saw what sat beneath all the armor and protocol. Not arrogant. Desperation disciplined into shape. Humanity was not commanding this war. It was surviving it one fortified room at a time. And in that cold realization, the distance between the savage outsider and the perfect soldiers became smaller than anyone wanted to admit. The Covenant did not believe in accidents for long. Strange reports from the battlefield moved upward through their hierarchy with unusual speed. A human who fought without armor. A human who survived plasma saturation. A human who killed Sanghali in close quarters and kept rising from wounds that should have reduced him to ash. Such a being could not be allowed to remain undefined. In a war built on doctrine and hierarchy, anomalies became threats the moment they resisted explanation. So the order went out across the local command net. Identify the target, contain if possible, eliminate if necessary. Logan felt the hunt before anyone told him it had begun. That instinct had kept him alive in more worlds than one. Patterns shifted around him. Patrols converged too neatly. Fire teams that should have been sweeping civilian zones were suddenly probing routes he had used the day before. Covenant snipers held angles longer than usual, waiting not for Marines in formation but for a single moving shape that closed distance instead of respecting it. They were learning him. That was dangerous. It also made him angry. UNSC intelligence tried to keep him inside the facility after intercepting fragments of Covenant targeting chatter. Logan ignored them and left through a maintenance corridor before dawn, slicking into the dead edges of the city where smoke hid movement and ruins broke every clean line of sight. A Spartan team was assigned to shadow him from a distance, though nobody pretended they could control the situation. The official goal was support and extraction. The real goal was observation. They wanted to see what happened when the enemy stopped treating Logan like a random obstacle and started treating him like prey. The first trap came in the skeleton of a collapsed hospital district. A false distress beacon drew Logan into a transit tunnel where the ceiling had been cut open just enough for Kigyar marksmen to cover every exit. The moment he entered, blue beams flashed through the dust. Behind them came two Sanghali zealots in ceremonial armor. Not battlefield scavengers but chosen hunters, blades burning with predatory confidence. It was the kind of kill box designed for Spartans. The Covenant had prepared for speed, aggression, and abnormal durability. They had still prepared for the wrong thing. Logan did not charge the zealots. He charged the tunnel wall. Concrete burst under his claws, showering the marksmen above with debris and forcing their shots wide. Before the zealots adjusted, he vanished through the dust and hit one from the flank, dragging them both into a maintenance recess too narrow for elegant sword work. The fight turned ugly at once. Armor scraped stone. Plasma scorched the ceiling. Logan took a blade through the shoulder and used the wound to pull the elite closer, ramming his claws through the alien's chest at point-blank range. The second zealot struck from behind, slicing deep across Logan's spine. He answered with a backhand slash that tore through the warrior's mandibles and sent black blood across the wall. Watching from Overwatch, the Spartan shadow team stopped thinking in terms of rescue. They started thinking in terms of containment radius. Logan was not merely surviving engagement. He was reshaping it. Covenant advantages disappeared the closer they came to him. Their discipline became a liability in tight spaces because Logan did not fight for position or honor or tactical cleanliness. He fought to end the other living thing in front of him by whatever line of violence opened first. The hunt widened after that. Special operations units dropped into the industrial quarter. Active camouflage flickered between shattered assembly lines. Ghost patrols swept alleys where refugees had once stood in ration queues. But every tightening noose became another map in Logan's head. He learned the sound of Covenant boots on metal catwalks, the scent of overheated shield generators, the half-second pause before a cloaked elite committed to a strike. Soon the hunted rhythm reversed. Songhaley teams entered dark structures and never emerged. Jackal scouts vanished from rooftops. Grunts fled positions at the first rumor that the metal-clawed demon was somewhere nearby. That was when fear changed sides. By the fourth night, Covenant field reports no longer described Logan as a target of strategic interest. They described him as a roaming close combat hazard capable of neutralizing superior units in confined terrain. A sterile phrasing for a simple truth. They had sent hunters into the ruins. The ruins had given them back a monster. And now, with every alley turning into a snare and every quiet building into a grave, the Covenant began to understand something humanity had only just started to suspect. A battlefield was not always won by the force with the better weapons. Sometimes it belonged to the thing that wanted survival more than order. Until then, Logan had understood the conflict the way he understood most conflicts. There were killers. There were victims. There was the immediate choice of whether to walk away or get involved. His life had been built on local decisions, on the brutal geometry of one bad moment leading to another. A convoy, a laboratory, a city block. Pain usually came with a face. Even when war spread wide, he met it one body at a time. The Halo universe refused that scale. Here, suffering was industrial. Entire worlds disappeared into after-action reports. Billions lived under the shadow of ships they would never see until the sky opened and fire came down. The realization did not arrive in a speech or a briefing. It arrived in fragments that accumulated until they became impossible to ignore. A refugee child asking whether the next planet would be safer. A burned data slate showing civilian evacuation percentages too low to read without anger. A Marine in the infirmary talking in his sleep about a city turned to glass. Then came the archived footage the Spartans did not mean for him to see, orbital images of human colonies after Covenant cleansing. Continents jarred, oceans boiling at the edges. Civilization erased so completely that the planets looked ashamed to have hosted it. Logan had known extinction in personal forms, a family line, a dream. This was different. This was species-level erasure carried out with religious certainty. For the first time since he had fallen into this universe, his anger stopped being only immediate. It deepened, broadened, became heavier. UNS Command noticed the shift before he admitted it to himself. He still refused rank, still vanished from secured rooms when conversations became too bureaucratic, still treated orders like suggestions made by strangers with too much confidence. But he began returning when civilians were involved. That was the lever. Not patriotism, not enlistment, not ideology. Evacuation corridors. Search and rescue. Counterattacks timed to buy transports a few more minutes. If there were people trapped at the center of a bad situation, Logan would show up eventually, usually irritated, usually bleeding, and almost always in time. The commanders tried to formalize it. Mission packages were prepared with his likely behavior in mind. Routes were chosen that allowed one unauthorized variable to enter tight combat zones. Marines began speaking about him the way old infantry once spoke about storms or artillery, as a force that could not be summoned on paper but might save you if the worst hour stretched long enough. Some officers hated that dependence. Others embraced it in private while denouncing it in public. Institutions prefer reliable machines. Desperate wars learn to love useful exceptions. Logan kept one foot outside their system because he understood its price. He had seen what happened when men became tools first and people second. The Spartans embodied that paradox better than anyone. Their honor was real. Their courage was unquestionable. So was the theft buried beneath their creation. Looking at them, Logan saw children sharpened into legends because the world had demanded it. That knowledge made cooperation possible, but trust difficult. He respected what they did. He resented why they existed. One evening, in a half-ruined command post overlooking a valley of blackened farmland, a Spartan asked him why he stayed. No ranking officer, no interrogation team, just one soldier speaking quietly while pelicans moved like shadows against the stars. Logan took a long time to answer. Finally, he said that running made sense when the fire was behind you. It made less sense when the fire was everywhere. The Spartan nodded as if that was enough. Maybe it was. Because the truth was changing inside him. He had arrived as an outsider driven by reflex, a lone survivor thrown into another world's nightmare. But the scale of that nightmare was forcing evolution. Instinct had gotten him through the first battles. Instinct alone would not answer a war in which whole populations lived or died based on what happened in the next hour. For perhaps the first time in a very long life, Logan began to fight not only against what was in front of him, but for what might remain if the enemy won. That did not make him gentler. It made him more dangerous. When raids targeted hospitals, he volunteered without using the word. When Covenant spearheads threatened evacuation hubs, he moved toward them before briefings ended. He worked with Marine squads when he had to, peeled off when command became stupid, and returned again once the civilians were safe. Over time, the arguments with officers changed tone. They stopped trying to own him. They started trying to predict him, which was as close to compromise as anyone expected. And beneath all of it, something almost hopeful took shape. Not comfort. Never that. The Halo universe had too much ash for comfort. But hope in a harsher sense, the kind that survives only because surrender is more unbearable than pain. Humanity had built fleets, Spartans, strategies, and fortresses to delay the dark. Logan represented another kind of answer entirely. Unclean, uncontrollable, yet very real. He was not the symbol the UNSC wanted. He was the proof that resistance could come from outside every system that claimed to manage it. In a galaxy where extinction moved with military precision that mattered. Because sometimes the difference between a doomed people and a living one is not discipline alone. Sometimes it is the existence of one soul stubborn enough to keep fighting after logic has filed its report and gone home. The stronghold stood on the edge of a mountain basin where old mines had been converted into bunkers, hangars, and supply chambers deep beneath the rock. It was not beautiful, but beauty had long since become a luxury of safer centuries. To the UNSC, it was vital because it anchored 3 evacuation routes and housed enough fuel, munitions, and communications hardware to keep the entire region from collapsing. To the Covenant, it was another throat to close. Their assault began before sunrise, when the ridge lines were still blue with cold and the valley mist had not yet burned away. First came the ships, dark shapes sliding over the peaks with that terrible calm humanity had learned to fear. Then the bombardment. Defensive emplacements vanished in towers of dirt and molten steel. Anti-air guns answered, filling the sky with streaking fire as longswords broke through the cloud layer and made attack runs low enough to shake the ground. Pelicans roared between blast columns, unloading Marines and medical teams while warthogs tore across the outer trench network. In the center of it all, Spartans moved toward breach points with the heavy momentum of living counteroffensives. Logan arrived without fanfare, riding in a troop bay no officer had officially assigned him to. He stepped out before the Pelican fully settled, looked once at the basin turning into hell, and immediately headed for the place where the line was bending hardest. Marines saw him pass and straightened in ways they did not entirely understand. He wore no powered armor, no insignia, no heroic polish. Yet by then everyone knew the shape of that silhouette and what usually followed it. Where Logan entered the fight, the enemy's assumptions tended to die first. The Covenant pushed with overwhelming coordination. Ghosts skimmed the trench mouths, cutting down defenders with disciplined bursts. Brutes hammered forward through mortar smoke, using bulk and momentum to force openings where elites could exploit them. Jackal snipers pinned machine gun nests, while banshees strafed the access roads leading to the inner hangars. It was a textbook assault, beautiful in the cold way a blade is beautiful. The UNSC answered with grit, training, and desperation, but the pressure kept building. Even Spartans could not be everywhere at once. That was where Logan mattered most. Not as the center of the battle, but as the rupture inside it. When a brute pack smashed through the East Trench and began tearing apart a wounded Marine platoon at close range, Logan met them in the mud before the fallback order finished crossing comms. The first brute swung a gravity hammer that would have pulped him. He went under it, claws flashing, and the huge alien folded with a roar cut short. A second caught him full in the ribs and launched him across the trench line. He rose before the brute could enjoy the kill, blood already sealing, and came back like something dragged upward by fury alone. Marines rallied around that sight. They fired steadier, held longer. Fear still lived in them, but it no longer had the whole room. On the western ridge, a Covenant strike team breached the sensor tower complex and trapped a cluster of technicians behind sealed blast doors. Spartans were 2 sectors away, delayed by armor contact. Logan took the maintenance lift up alone. The fighting inside the tower turned into a brutal vertical maze, gunfire ricocheting through narrow platforms while plasma turned control panels into falling sparks. One elite commander held the upper catwalk with an energy sword, every movement precise and lethal. Logan climbed through the crossfire, took a blade through the abdomen, trapped the sword arm under one clawed hand, and drove the other set through the commander's chest so hard the impact threw both of them into the railing. By the time the technicians emerged, shaking and half-deaf, the tower belonged to humanity again. But the battle's true turning point came at the central pass. A Covenant column broke through the mine approach and started driving toward the inner bunker gates, a spear of armor and infantry that would split the stronghold in half if it reached the core. UNSC armor was burning out. Air support had been diverted. The nearest Spartan team was engaged in a separate containment action uphill. Command issued fallback coordinates no one wanted to hear. Then Logan saw the wounded being pulled across the pass, saw the medics slipping in the dirt while plasma chewed up the stone around them, and made his decision with the simplicity that had always defined him. He ran straight at the breach. Sometimes legends are not born from impossible victories. They are born from moments so unreasonable that the human mind cannot help but remember them. One man charging a line of Covenant armor in the open qualifies. Marines shouted for him to fall back. He did not. A ghost exploded as he tore into the pilot at full sprint, using the vehicle's wreckage as cover for the next advance. He leapt onto a Wraith as it rotated its mortar, cut through the access seam, and vanished into the hatch amid screams and rising smoke. The tank died seconds later, erupting in a blast that staggered friend and foe alike. Through that confusion, Spartans hit the flanks, Marines surged, and the pass that had been 1 minute from collapse became a killing ground for the invaders instead. By dusk the basin still burned, but it remained in human hands. Covenant forces withdrew in fragmented elements, harried by airstrikes and long-range artillery from positions that had survived only because the center had not fallen. Medics moved among the wounded. Engineers sealed breaches. Soldiers sat in the dirt, too tired to celebrate. And in quiet conversations passing from trench to hangar, one fact repeated with growing certainty. The battle had not been won by Logan alone. No single warrior could claim that in a war this large. But the battlefield had bent around him. Even the Spartans, who respected results more than myth, looked at him differently after that. Not as an unknown variable. Not as a feral experiment. As a fellow force of war, shaped by another history, answering the same darkness in his own unforgiving language. After the guns quieted, the mountains seemed unnaturally still. Smoke climbed in thin black pillars from the basin. Recovery crews moved like shadows through the wreckage, tagging bodies, salvaging what could still be used, sealing what could not. Somewhere below, command was already turning survival into reports, commendations, casualty charts, and strategic projections. That was how civilizations persisted. They translated blood into paperwork and called the result continuity. Logan stood above it all on a broken ridge, watching the last light bleed across ruined stone. He had been offered things after the battle: formal status, restricted access, a place in the machine, if not fully inside it, then near enough to be named and cataloged. He refused all of it, politely by his standards, which still sounded like defiance to most officers. The UNSC could recognize his value. It could even work beside him. But it could not own him, and some part of command finally understood that trying would cost more than it gained. The Spartans understood it first. Perhaps because they had spent their whole lives inside systems powerful enough to erase choice, they were quicker to recognize a man who would rather walk alone than become efficient in the wrong hands. Respect came quietly, a nod in a corridor, a helmet inclined before deployment. Space-mated briefing tables for someone who might ignore half the plan and still save the mission. In another life, Logan might have hated how similar they were. In this one, similarity was not the point. Survival was. To the Covenant, he became something harder to classify with each surviving witness. Not a standard human combatant, not a Spartan, not a vehicle, not a tactic. Rumors spread through their ranks of a steel-boned demon that kept advancing through plasma fire and turned close-quarters engagements into slaughterhouses. Military language tried to flatten the fear, but fear remained. Entire patrols altered route patterns in ruined urban zones. Elite commanders committed more resources than logic recommended just to ensure he was not operating nearby. He had become what every empire dreads beneath its ceremony. An exception. For humanity, the meaning was different. Logan was not hope in the shining heroic sense. He was rougher than that, darker at the edges, too unwilling to belong. Yet perhaps that was why he mattered. The war against the Covenant was stripping humanity down to whatever truths could survive pressure. Beneath the fleets and fortresses and chains of command was a simpler fact. Existence would be defended by anyone still capable of standing. So Logan kept moving. From colony to outpost, from evacuation zone to fresh inferno, appearing where the fight became intimate enough for courage to hurt. He did not wear the uniform. He did not carry the banner. But he fought. And in a galaxy built on extinction, that was enough to turn a lone outsider into legend. Humanity had not made him. It had not trained him, designed him, or owned the rage that drove him forward. But in the darkest war of its history, it had found room for one weapon it never created. And that weapon chose again and again not to let the night win.